frankly.
That's right. That's true. But we are digitally coexisting in the same virtual space through the magic of the internet.
We're in the stream.
That's right. We're in the cloud. We're in the stream. We're in the cloud.
All right, break it down, dude. Break it down.
Okay. All right. So first of all, just do me a favor and introduce yourself.
I'm Rav Mike Foyer. I am a creative content generator. I have the podcast called The Jewish Story. It's a history of story of Jewish history that goes from the Book of Daniel all the way through. I'm in 1967 right now. I'm an educator.
What's your website?
My website is jewishstory.co. You can also find me on SoundCloud, Facebook, all that good stuff, Twitter. What else am I? I'm a spiritual counselor. I spend a lot of my time and energy trying to help people clarify their vision and set very specific goals and patterns of positive behavior that'll let them attain what it is they're after in life. I'm also a formal teacher. I work at the Pardes Institute, a father of 5, husband of 1, and struggling to be a good Jew.
But you are also a rabbi.
Oh, I said Rav Mike. I mean, that is my name. Yeah.
You are.
See, it says right down there on the. It says
Rav Mike Foyer. That's right.
It says it must be true.
And you are also one of my mentors. You're also one of the people. I'm just going to tell you. I had a dream one time. Like Rav Mike kind of saved my life because I'm one of these human beings that has like so much going on in his head that it's just like it's like there's worlds upon worlds in my head. Like you need a spaceship just to travel the distances between like aspects of my brain.
Yes, at light speed.
Yeah, and I used to, and it's like at first I was like, who the heck am I going to possibly talk to about what's going on in my head? Who's not going to call the police, and try to get me locked up in an insane asylum? And Rav Mike was my Jewish spiritual guide, and I remember one time I had this dream that I was like in some sort of underground lair of bad guys who were like chasing me through these hallways. And I ran into a room because I had to escape. I had to get away. And there was a ladder going up, and but the ladder like just stopped at the ceiling. Like there was no way up. There was no way to continue. It was just like a ladder that led to nowhere. And then the dream shifted, and all of a sudden Rav Mike was like standing in this room, and he was singing kind of like Tom Bombadil. He was like singing a niggin, and he was really happy. And he like reached down.
You just compared me to Tom Bombadil. I'm actually quite moved.
He reached down to the floor and pulled open this hatch, and he let me out. And that was the dream. Yeah.
That kind of says it all.
Yeah. What did you let out, Mike?
I was actually going to say, and those who out here who would prefer that I kept the place shut, I take no responsibility. Just trying to be a good guy.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol nivro.
Amen.
You let out the Aleph male.
Well, that's what we're trying to do, isn't it?
That is what we're trying to do, and that's actually what we're here to talk about, right? Is Shavuot from the Jewish sacred masculinity perspective. How does a Jewish man, celebrate Shavuot? And on that note, people, I want to start with the basics of just this. I'm just going to read you something quick from Chabad.org, because I think that like it's good to just start with like the core texts and sources.
They give you a good frame, sure.
Right, and then work our way up, right? So Chabad kind of just like deals it out. So I'm just going to read. It's a very, very short synopsis of the holiday. It's like, and that's how Judaism works, is everything is like encrypted. Everything is like compressed, right? It's lots of black fire on top of white fire. So let's see if I can just share the screen really quick. Okay. All right. Application window. I'm going to share this.
Master the stream, Eitan. Master the stream.
Yeah, right? And now, we're going into infinite regression.
Yes, I actually been regressing for years.
All right, and here we go. So, Mike, what are you seeing right now? Are you seeing the article?
I am seeing the article. I'm seeing our screen with the article on it.
Okay, good, because I can't see, man. I can't see what you can see right now. Okay, so just to read this is from Chabad.org. What is the meaning of Shavuot? We're starting with the basics, and then we're going to work our way up.
Okay.
Shavuot means weeks, and it refers to the biblical holiday celebrated on the 6th of Sivan and the 7th in the diaspora, on the anniversary of the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, at Sinai. The word Shavuot or Shavuos means weeks. It celebrates the completion of the 7-week Omer counting period, the second day between the second day of Passover and Shavuot. The same Hebrew word also means oaths, which is the subject of the Talmudic tractate of Shavuot. Shavuot is also the celebration of the wheat harvest and the ripening of the first fruits, which is the reason for the other two biblical names of this holiday, Yom HaBikurim, or the Day of First Fruits, and Chag HaKatzir, the Harvest Festival. In the Talmud, Shavuot is also called Atzeret, meaning the stoppage, a reference to the prohibition against work on this holiday. In the holiday prayer service, we refer to it as Zman Matan Toratenu, the time of the giving of our Torah. And this year, Shavuos is going to be on this next week, starting next week, Thursday night, which is the 28th of April and the 6th of the Hebrew month of Sivan.
20th of May.
Excuse me, I keep on doing that.
That's because March was actually 60 days long.
I just got so confused.
It's the longest March in Western history.
April when it's actually May. Okay, so that is on the 28th of May, and the 5th and the 6th of the Hebrew month of Sivan. And all right, now that's like the surface. That is the surface, right? Mm-hmm. So now let's go below the surface, Mike. And I'm actually going to hand it to you, because really what I'm doing right now is consulting you, and I'm asking you, what should I know about Shavuos?
This is going to be expensive, by the way. My consulting hours don't come cheap.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's a very broad question. Is there a way in which you'd like to sharpen it, or you just want to hear what I think about Shavuot in general?
Well, maybe, you know what? Maybe we'll start here. What does it mean that God gave the Torah to the Jewish people? It's the anniversary of God's giving the Torah to the Jewish people. So what does that mean? Does that mean that it's like we saw in the Ten Commandments or in Prince of Egypt? Like, was it like that? Is that what was going on? What? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to think of Shavuot as really deeply associated with Ma'amad Har Sinai, the standing at Sinai, which is in many ways more about experience than content. Because we know just from the narrative of the Torah itself that the law continued to sort of come down, as it were, perhaps even for the whole 40 years in the desert. It's a bit of a debate at what point whether Moshe wrote it all down at once, etc. I'm going to get there. But my point is that though we call it Zman Matan Toratenu, the day of the giving of our Torah, I see the emphasis in the broad swath of the sages' thoughts as on the experience. This was a formative experience for our people. And I once asked my Rosh Hashiva, who shall remain nameless in this context, what's the minimum definition of being on the team? What it means to be a believing Jew. Mm-hmm. He said to me, really, it made a deep impression on me. He said, you have to believe that something happened at Sinai.
Interesting.
And I think that itself is quite indicative of what he believed happened there, which is that, if you lined up 600,000 people and you showed them the sort of great light, smoke, and fire show that the Torah describes, could you imagine doing an exit poll at Sinai? So, sir, tell me, what did you see? Sir, tell me, what did you understand from this experience, right? 600,000 people, what's the odds that they'll all tell you the same thing? The answer is
none.
Right? And that's kind of the rest of Jewish history in a nutshell, is that we've been trying to figure out what it was that we received, what it was that happened at Sinai. But the thing which binds us together is that we stood there and it made an impression. It made such an impression, in fact, that here you and I are 3,000 plus years later, still trying to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that I think about in terms of Mount Sinai is also that I have that emunah that there was a revelation of God at Mount Sinai. Do I know the details of what that revelation was? I know what some parts of that revelation were, like the 5 books of Moses, right? Or like I know that there were some pieces. I know that the Torah Shabbal Pei, the oral Torah, was also given at Mount Sinai. But do I fully comprehend? Maybe it was like some sort of incredible mystical awakening, which a lot of different commentaries and the Midrash, bring down. Like, there's all kinds of crazy stories. There's the story that God spoke the first 2 commandments of the 10 commandments, and each time Am Yisrael was like so blown away that they literally died and then were brought back to life, and then they died again and were brought back to life again.
That'd make an impression.
And then for the last 8 commandments, they were like, listen, Moses, you just talk to God directly, because we can't handle this frequency. We can't handle this energy. There's all kinds of crazy stories. There's also, the idea that it was over the 600,000 men and all of Am Yisrael experiencing a collective enlightenment, right? That it was like literally not just like the Buddha sitting under the tree getting enlightened, or some dude at the top of a mountain getting enlightened. It was literally like the entire nation of Am Yisrael, every man, woman, and child was experiencing this collective spiritual awakening and connection to like the source code of the universe.
So in that sense, I think it's important to keep, I don't know if clear is the right word, but keep differentiated in our minds the difference between content and experience when it comes to revelation. And we have this in our tradition. We talk about Natan lanu et Torato v'chai olam nata b'tochenu. Right? God gave us his Torah, but he planted eternal life within us. Because of course, the text that we typically think of when we talk about the Torah is only the beginning of a process of engaging God in the world. It's not the beginning of the process. It's the field of play. It's the tools, the terms of engagement, if you will. But the process of Torah never ends. It never ends. I mean, you and I are responsible to bring the Torah that the world needs now into the world right now. Right? Every soul that comes into the world is meant to engage the Torah in its own context, and that's why it can actually be eternal. So therefore, I think that the content is not, I'm not dismissing it, please don't misunderstand me, but it is secondary to the depth.
What do you mean when you say content? And how are you distinguishing between
what was in Moshe's hands? I mean, what was in Moshe's hands? There were words, right? There were words that Moshe heard. There were words that God commanded him to write down. We speak about the engraving on the Luchot, which of course is the only sort of reference to text in that story, right? But of course, what those words meant, the bridge of how you take an eternal truth and apply it to an ephemeral subjective existence, that's a much deeper process. And that's our task as a people, to hold fast to the sort of immutable nature of what we received at Sinai. That's the Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah. But at the same time, to be constantly engaged in the immediacy and yes, ephemeral nature of how we apply it to the world in every moment. That's a natural task.
So let me see if I can just reflect back to you what you said, because I'm tuning into the frequency of your words and I'm not fully absorbing them, most likely because I just have a big ego. But let me see if I can get what you're saying. Like when you're saying there's the content and then there's the content of the Torah, and then there's
the experience of revelation, which changes the way you relate to reality. I'll give you an example. Maybe it might help.
Yeah.
So if you take a particular law from the Torah that, I'll give you a classic, right? It says eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, right? That justice means it's sort of an equivalency of loss would appear to be what it means. The sages took this, what appears to be a very clear statement, and first of all, dug deeply into it to find the principle, right? God values justice in the sense that which has been done to me, I should do to others. But then they expanded it out into their world and said, well, wait a minute, how does that map onto human reality? I mean, if I put your eye out, it might hurt more for you than it does for me, or vice versa. Or what if you're a sharpshooter and I don't know, I'm a cucumber grower? I mean, you're going to need your eye a lot more than I am. That's a big loss. How could we ever possibly have equivalency through what appears to be a simple statement? So you hear what they did. They went deep into the intent, and then they went out into the world, and they came up with the idea that what God is speaking about is a monetary exchange, because that's a way in which we can assure the value of justice is protected, but that the subjective reality is not lost sight of in that what the Near East called lex talanis, right? Literally, right? Cutting off your hand, because that's justice. Why would that be justice, right? And so that's like a halachic, a legal expression. On the deeper level, you may have noticed that the description of the revelation at Sinai is bound up with a loosening of how we experience reality. We saw the sounds, we saw the shofrot, we heard the lights, yes? Something, right, which is called synesthesia out there in the world, either of developmental psychology or psychedelics or both, depending on where you get such reference points. And that comes to teach us that the truth is we're constructing the world around us. It doesn't exist outside of ourselves. Our senses are being sorted by the mind and could be sorted otherwise. And that's what happened at Sinai. God tipped us off, said, listen, I put you in this world, but don't make any mistakes. You are as much a partner in creating this world as I. And here's the Torah, which will be the key for building it in your deepest reflection of the divine image which is within you, and your deepest understanding of the divine will which is in this Torah that I give you.
And so when you say that Hashem gave us this Torah, you're talking about what are you talking about when you say Hashem gave us this Torah?
I want you to picture Moshe coming down from Sinai, right? He's got something in his hands, right? He's got a text, we'll call it. When does the oral Torah begin?
I don't know how to answer that question, man.
Yeah, it was a setup. Well, who's waiting for Moshe at the bottom of the mountain?
Am Yisrael.
Well, I mean, yeah, they're like off in the distance dancing with the calf. Who's really waiting for him? Who's the individual?
Aaron.
No, Yoshua. Yoshua is the one that follows Moshe and says, Moshe says, here and no further. And Yoshua sets up his little, like, I don't know, pup tent. And says, okay, I'll wait for you here. So the oral Torah is born in the moment when Moshe meets Yoshua on his way down the mountain. And Yoshua says, ooh, what'd you get? Meaning, the minute that Moshe has to begin to differentiate between the text he's holding, his experience of its revelation, and his understanding of its meaning, in order to explain to Yoshua, who wasn't there in that deepest moment. We were all standing afar. It's true, we were standing afar, but what it is that came down to us came down through Moshe. And because of that, it's both accessible, it's human. Moshe's a human. We don't have God's Torah. We have the Torah that Moshe was able to receive.
You know, I want to just jump in there in terms of, like, you know, in my mind's eye, imagining Joshua talking to Moshe, being like, what happened? And just share one of the midrashim that I first heard from Rabbi Natan Lopez Cardozo, and please help me give it over with all of the correct details. But basically, there's a midrash. A midrash is like a story from ancient Israel, from, you know, it could be from the time of, well, really going all the way back to the Torah, to the 5 books of Moses, to the Mishnah, to the Gemara, but these ancient stories. And one of the stories is that basically Moses went up to Mount Sinai to get the Torah, and what he saw was just white fire. And God is like, this is the Torah. It's like this infinite white fire. And God is like, okay, this is the Torah. And Moses is like, well, nobody's going to get it. Like, no one's going to get it. No one's going to understand. No one's going to understand this. And so then God takes black fire and he throws it on top of the white fire, and it makes Yud, He, Vav, He, which is God's 4-letter name. And then Hashem is like, okay, this is the Torah. Go give it to the people. And Moshe looks at the Yud, He, Vav, He, and he's like, they're still not going to get it. So then Hashem takes more black fire on top of the white fire, and he throws it, and it says, you know, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, right? And then Moshe's like, well, they're still not going to get it. And so there's this process in which Hashem throws more and more black fire on top of the white fire, right? until finally we have what is known as the 5 books of Moses. And then Moshe says, okay, this they're going to get. And then he goes down to give it to the people. And one of the things that blows my mind about that is the idea is that what the Torah actually is this white fire, but it had to be stepped down. The frequency of this energy had to be stepped down. There was an encoding of information.
Yeah, and you want to be careful of the static nature of the language you're using. What the Torah, what I want to forget the there. What Torah then is the process of mining away the black fire in order to release the white. Right? Meaning without the black fire, you have no access. Without language, we can't conceptualize or communicate. But the depth of my experience is killed when I have to put it into words. Right? At the same time, if I don't put it into words, I can't really understand, articulate, share. Right? And so if God wanted to share the Torah with Moshe, with Am Yisrael, so the black fire is necessary, but don't make the mistake of thinking it's a static process. That's why
you're saying when you say static process, you mean like that it was the 5 books and that's it.
Here you go. Here's a rule book. It's got everything you need. The Torah is not a rule book. It's a training manual that will make you into the type of person who will understand its depth.
That's such an interesting way to put it, because what you just said, like the Torah is a training manual that you will make you the type of person who understands its depth. It's so freaking true. It's like if you're reading the Torah, if you're reading the 5 books of Moses, and at the same time you're not keeping kosher and you're not keeping Shabbat and you're not really living a Jewish life within the parameters of the halacha, you can't really understand it. And I'm saying this from personal experience because it's not about an intellectual understanding. It's not about understanding the concepts of the Torah. When we say understanding the Torah, when I say understanding the Torah, what I am talking about is a shift in consciousness. And what I would say that shift in consciousness is you could say metaphysically seeing a little bit of that white fire. I had the experience recently of being illuminated by that white fire. And I'm talking about a spiritual experience right now. I had a couple of days ago, I just I find it's best for me to learn Torah in the morning, like literally before I even daven. Like my best practice is to just learn Torah because my mind is so receptive. My mind is so receptive. It's the most receptive it is the entire day right after I get out of bed. So it's basically wash my hands and start learning some Torah. Because whatever it is that I'm going to read, whatever it is that I'm going to encounter, I'm just going to absorb, and it's going to make an impression on me in a way that nothing else will. And so I want that to be Torah. And so I was just reading Bamidbar. You know, we're in Bamidbar. I was reading this week's Parsha in Hebrew. And it's like I have 2 identities. Actually,
only 2?
Yeah, right.
Come on, man, branch out.
There's like my secular identity where it's like, you know, I'm an entrepreneur and I'm building my life, and you know, I'm listening to Joe Rogan while I'm washing the dishes, and it's like, you know, and it's like, and I live in Israel, but I'm from America, and it's, I don't know if you want to call it a surface level identity, but it's like sort of like and then I have another identity, which you could call my Jewish identity, but it's not like an intellectual thing. Like I identify as Jewish. Like it's not like that. It's like I was learning the Torah. I was reading the Torah in Hebrew. And all of a sudden it was like the interior fabric of my being was illuminated. And all of a sudden I knew I was a Jew who was living in Eretz Yisrael, and my purpose was to align my will with Hashem's will. And in learning Torah, I was aligning my will with Hashem's will, and I was aligned. It was like somehow learning the Torah aligned me, right? And even if I didn't fully understand everything I was reading, just by learning the Torah, I suddenly became aligned with some sort of spiritual magnet, which shifted my consciousness.
I mean, on some level, I would say that there was a harmonization between will and manifestation in that moment. I mean, because you do have a will to be an entrepreneur and to listen to Joe Rogan, and certainly you have a will to clean the dishes, or at least your wife has a will that they be cleaned, and you have a will to make your wife happy, right? But when you learn Torah as a Jew and when you live it, and I want to come back to that very important piece, that Torah is not just meant to be learned, it's meant to be lived, and the two can't really be separated. When you do that, you're expressive of a will which underlies creation. Right? There's no fundamental will in creation that you do the dishes. Not that I'm disparaging it, but that's that sense of almost harmonization or synchronicity, which can be felt in those spiritual moments. Oh, my manifest identity, my manifest reality right now is tapping deep into a will which spans time and dimension, and therefore, even though I'm just me, this guy here living in the land of Israel,
I'm sitting in my living room learning Torah.
Page, black fire on the page, learning words. Maybe I got a dictionary. I mean, all kinds of like normal stuff. But it is expressive of a will, of a desire.
Right, and I'm a different person. I'm literally a different person.
Because you're manifest on a much more profound level, I would say.
Yeah, and I think on that note, it just brought me to this question of like, you know, like when we say the Torah, so wow, there's just so much to say. It's like, so one of the ways I like to say it is like, you know, okay, so what is the Torah? So if you take the 5 books of Moses and you put it on the table, is that the Torah? Okay, no. Okay, so then let's take the 5 books of Moses and the prophets and the writings, you know, and the Psalms. And
24 books of the Hebrew Bible.
Put the Tanakh on the table. Okay, so we put the Tanakh on the table. So is that the Torah? No. Okay, so let's put the Tanakh and the Mishnah and the Gemara on the table. Is that the Torah? No. Okay, so then let's put the Tanakh and the Mishnah and the Gemara and Rashi and Tosfot and all the commentaries and Rambam and the Arizal and, you know, all the Lithuanian commentaries and the Sephardic commentaries and, you know, the Hasidic commentaries and the Neo-Hasidic. We pile every single book published of Torah on the table. So then is that the Torah?
No, because the only thing that you could put on that table that would make it the Torah is all of Am Yisrael. That is the whole point. That when all the sort of Kabbalistic notions that there are 600,000 letters in the Torah and 600,000 root souls in Am Yisrael, aside from the metaphysics, which is above my pay grade, I'm not going into that. I'm not a Kabbalist. But I think that the simple but profound meaning is that Am Yisrael is the vehicle for the expression of Torah in the world. So we're given and we inherit, and all those books are Torah. But that what's called Hea Yidiyah, the definite article, is not applicable. Do you know the first Mishnah in Pirkei Avot? I bet you do.
First Mishnah is that like every all of Israel has a chelik in Olam Haba, and then God gave to the Torah. God gave the Torah to Moses at Mount Sinai. Moses gave it to Yeshua. Yeshua gave it to the prophets. The prophets gave it to the.
So there's two very important distinctions in the language you see. First of all, it's not God gave. It's Moshe Kibel. Moshe received. It's a very important distinction because God doesn't hold back. We're limited in our ability to receive, and that's an important piece here, which is why the Torah is an ongoing project. Second, and to me most important, it doesn't say Moshe received the Torah at Sinai. It does not say that. Moshe Kibel Torah mi Sinai.
Moshe Kibel Torah.
Not Moshe Kibel ha-Torah.
The Torah, right. So yeah, that's the question is that, yeah, go ahead.
Because what the root meaning of the word Torah is hora'ah. It's an instruction for life. And that has to be always relevant in order to succeed, which means that, of course, Moshe Kibel Torah mi Sinai. But to say Moshe Kibel ha-Torah mi Sinai would mean we had to freeze life. You know, back there at Sinai, there were no microwaves at Sinai. What are we going to do now? Eitan, am I allowed to use a microwave? You know?
In terms of tapping into those instructions, you know, one of the metaphors that I like to use that comes from the, you know, the psychedelic realm is people talk about things like psychedelic mushrooms, and they say that the mushroom itself is a physical manifestation of actually a larger plane of consciousness and perception. And that when you eat the mushroom, all of a sudden you're seeing the world in a completely different way because the mushroom itself is actually an interdimensional doorway to a parallel plane of existence that's coexisting with our plane of existence, but you can't see it until you take the mushroom. So lahavdil times 1,000, like when you talk about the Torah is an instruction book for life, and it's not the Torah, it's that Moshe received Torah at Mount Sinai. It's that Torah is actually a state of consciousness. It's a world. It's an entire way of existing. And that it's only when you actually learn Torah and la'asok b'divrei Torah, you involve yourself in words of Torah, that all of a sudden you enter into that world in which all of a sudden God actually exists and you are actually Jewish. Like, it's not just a cultural signifier on an application that you fill out for a university, like, like ethnic identity, black, white, Hispanic, other, Jewish,
We've been other for a long time.
Yeah.
I want to give you another metaphor if I can, which is that because it's very important to remember that you've referenced it a few times, that Torah is meant to be lived and not just learned. The 613 mitzvot, which are the sort of core of the Torah, right? These 5 books of Moses, usually people mean when they say the Torah, are commandments for how we live. And they're bound up with also a narrative of a people. And those 2 elements themselves are bound up with this white fire that underlies it, right? This state of immanent consciousness, which can always be unearthed and expanded. So you put those all together, I would say that the Torah is essentially a story that shapes its reader, who in turn births the next layer of meaning of that very same story into the world. And that's done through both learning and living Torah. Right? If you want to understand, say, the commandment of tefillin, which is a good example, because inside the tefillin, there's a encapsulation of the main points of the story.
Mm-hmm.
You take the main points of the story and you bind it on your arm, right? So if you do that in a standard context, so you're a bunch of guys together in the shul laying tefillin, fine. You ever lay tefillin in an airport?
Yes, I have. It's
second only to standing naked in public as far as things that you'd rather really not do.
Kind of weird. Like, what am I doing?
I mean, here are these leather things I'm just going to wrap around my arm here in the corner, folks. Nothing strange going on here, right? That's a tremendous state of consciousness and an assertion of a reality in the face of a surrounding reality, which has a transformative potential. Right?
Yeah.
Binding yourself to the story.
Right. That's also one of the contexts that in which I relate to Judaism and Torah is the concept of co-creation, that, like, in keeping kosher, in putting on tefillin, in wearing tzitzit, in wearing a kippah, in living a Jewish life, and retelling over and over again the story of the Exodus from Egypt, what I'm actually doing is co-creating a reality. There's this concept of consensus reality, that the only reason $100 has any value, like if I were to travel back in time with a stack of $100 bills, right? Like a stack of Benjamins. And I traveled back to like 1620. And like I walked into a market in London with my stack of Benjamins and was like, yo, I want all your bread. I'm going to buy bread and cheese and wine. I got my Benjamins, right? And I like gave those Benjamins to the street seller. He'd look at them and be like,
we don't know that.
I'd probably end up under arrest for like trying fraud, right? Why? Well, because that money has no value, because none of the people there value those pieces of paper, because there's no consensus that makes the reality that this is actually valuable, right? Like the only reason that the only reason that people follow orders when Donald Trump gives orders, and same thing with Barack Obama, and same thing with George Bush, and same thing with Bill Clinton, right? Is because people consent to the idea that he's the president of the United States.
It's a big challenge America faces right now.
Yeah, it's a consensus reality. Everybody consents that Donald Trump is the president of the United States. Everybody's consenting that dollars have a certain value. And if enough people no longer gave their consent, then dollars would not have any value.
Yes, I do want to bring us back to Sinai, though, and just point out that one of the reasons that I'm putting the emphasis on the experience of Revelation is it's to point out to us that we're co-creators, we're co-authors of this story. It's not just a consensus amongst humanity. And remember, Shavuot is linking between the Exodus from Egypt to the Revelation at Sinai, right? We've been counting now, right? Today is day 42 of the Omer. We're making a clear link between the message of the Exodus, which is that God didn't just wind the world up and walk away to let it sort of fare for itself, right? That there's a divine will which is constantly being expressed. And from there to Sinai, which is, and the purpose of that divine will having constant expression is to empower us as Am Yisrael to build a better world, right? We're building a vessel to receive a level of wisdom, that sort of layer of white fire, as you called it, which isn't obvious and can't just be taken all at once. We have to build ourselves into a vessel that can receive. Remember, God doesn't hold back. The only thing which is limiting creation is our ability to receive. And that's our task, is to cultivate the consciousness, the behaviors, the society. When Torah puts a heavy emphasis on, hey man, your ox gored my ox. I don't want to live in a world where your ox can just run amok, right? Do something about that, right? That's a critical piece of what we're doing, of building a vessel that can receive ever deeper wisdom.
Mm-hmm. So how does one increase their capacity to receive?
I think that building right relationships is probably the most fundamental posture. And that happens in a number of dimensions. It happens interpersonally. It can happen most critically within the space of the family, which is why the Torah puts such a heavy emphasis on family as a building block for society. And it happens, I think, also just in general interpersonally, thinking about how I can communicate, how I can hold space for other to help them to come to be, and in turn encourage in them the same posture toward me. Happens toward society, happens certainly toward God, right? This very notion that I'm always before God, that in the deepest truth, that I'm not other than God, that I'm a particular manifestation of an overwhelming will for relationship, is a very important guide in how I make my decisions, right? How I guide my behaviors. And then I would say that there's the very specific principles of the Torah, 613 mitzvot, the rhythms of prayer and learning, right? Discipline in diet, behavior, language, etc. Fill in the blank, right? And not discipline just for discipline's sake, but discipline because it's what allows us to have real focus, growth, right? To deepen our sense of what's our values and our most profound wills and how to manifest them in the world. That's the short answer. I mean, that's a lot of what I do actually in my spiritual counseling, as you know, is try to help people unearth that deeper will and then put it into specific behaviors that will make it real in the world. Because what good is vision if you don't put it to reality?
And like so I'm gonna switch gears for a second. Actually, first, Charlie Harvith. Charlie, thank you for watching. Charlie. Ask the question, do you think that do you know Charlie?
I do.
Okay. Do you think that, what's up? Do you think that understanding Torah exists only in the brain or in some other place as well? Or where does this consciousness reside?
It's a great question. I mean, right? Meaning it is a physical, emotive, intellectual, and I would say, for lack of a better term, spiritual, meaning beyond the embodied existence. That's why I don't think you can really understand Torah in its full depth if you're not living it. And also if you don't give yourself the space to have healthy emotional life.
You know, I have to just say this again, Mike, it like breaks my heart that so many Jews don't actually know what Torah is, that so many Jews just relate to Torah as a book or as like an abstract form of wisdom, which is part of the collective soup of wisdom. And in our postmodern time, like it's like, oh yeah, there's Chinese food and there's Mexican food and there's Jewish food, and in the same way there's Chinese wisdom and there's Mexican wisdom and there's Jewish wisdom, and the Jewish wisdom is called Torah, and you could do a fusion of like the Chinese Jewish wisdom, and it's like no, it's not on that level of some sort of category that is just kind of like there to be mixed in. It's not like an ingredient from a particular region. It's actually a revelation. That Torah is a revelation, and it's a consciousness.
And it's a holistic frame for existence, which, by the way, so may Chinese and Mexican wisdom be as well. I don't know because I'm not Chinese or Mexican. Meaning, but for Am Yisrael, the Torah is a holistic frame of reference, which must be engaged in its fullness and not, like you're saying, Forget the smorgasbord of mixing with other things, because Ezu Chacham Lomei Mikol Adam. Person who's wise learns from everyone. But why are you able to learn from everyone? Because you have a whole frame within which to fit, to examine, analyze, parse, and integrate all the other pieces of wisdom that you're finding. Without a frame, without a lens through which you can see the wholeness of creation, what do we have then? And that lens, like Charlie's asking, it's a physical, emotional, spiritual, intellectual.
But that lens, like in my experience, that lens, like there's a difference between like reading a book of Jewish wisdom and living as a Jew.
Yes.
You know, and the consciousness that comes when you're in Torah consciousness. Like it's not just a book, it's not just wisdom, it's like literally a world. Like it's, I can't explain it, but well, it's like, yeah.
I mean, I would point out that challenge exists within religiosity as well, because it's also not just a religion, right?
Oh, for sure.
So it's a whole way of life. Like I said, it's a holistic frame for existence. One of the great challenges of religion is that we tend to draw boundaries, either between us and other people, or between my religious and secular life, right? But the reality is there's no part of life, there's no place in the world, there's no people that the Torah doesn't touch if you live it fully. And our task is always to bind together not only creation, but heaven and earth in particular.
So on that note, how does Torah bind together heaven and earth?
You know, a story, this has been proven by tremendous amounts of both anthropological research, also in the world today of advertising and communication. A story is the most robust tool that humanity knows for binding together knowledge and experience into a holistic way of living, of knowing the world, right? And in that sense, it's precisely what the Torah is. It's a story. It's a story which
but then somebody could just write a different story, and then they're finding a different heaven and earth.
You know what? Not my issue. I feel no need to sort of like make some polemic argument that this is the story and it must be that way.
See, but I wouldn't. I would not necessarily go in that direction, but I would say that the Torah is the Jewish people's story, which was revealed at Mount Sinai for the Jewish people.
And it's being lived once again in our land. By the way, if you want to talk about sort of like putting the story to the proof, it's fairly incredible that I'm looking out my window right now at the rebuilt Jerusalem. I mean, let's not forget, tonight is Yom Yerushalayim.
Yeah.
And don't forget, Yom Yerushalayim, the phrase Jerusalem Day, comes from the Psalms. But you know what the original Yom Yerushalayim was? Go look it up in Psalm 137. It was the day of mourning for the destruction of Jerusalem. Zacharnu at Yom Yerushalayim. Remember the day of Jerusalem when Edom said, destroy it, raise it to its foundations. Now Yom Yerushalayim is like, wow, we're back. So, like I said, I have no need to enter into the whole sort of cross-cultural, relativist, absolutist. It's meaningless to me because as a Jew, as a member of Am Yisrael, I don't need external proofs to know the truth, the wholeness, and the profound power of Torah.
Right, but there's a difference between Torah and story. That's the distinction I'm making. Right, because if you say Torah is a story, then Torah is on the same level as Batman and Spider-Man.
Okay, I mean, on one level, yes, meaning the narrative tools, et cetera, are always available. On the other level, what is Batman really asking of you as a story? Do you live your life according to
dress like a bat and fight crime?
Yeah, and that's why I said, is in the end of the day, the power of the Torah is it's a story which shapes its reader, not as a passive.
Right, but when you say the Torah, you're not just talking about the 5 books of Moses. You're talking about Torah, like the whole experience,
the whole thing, lived, learned, eaten, breathed. I mean, it's one of the reasons that the land of Israel is such a critical vessel for receiving Torah. Our tradition teaches that prophecy, right, the next stage of revelation after what happened at Sinai, is only available in the land of Israel.
It's interesting. Someone just asked a question on the YouTube comments. This is from Akiva. Also, shout out to Old Farm Show. Akiva asked, Shalom, question about Torah and Shavuot. When in Jewish history did Shavuot become about receiving the Torah, and what could Shavuot of Yemei HaMashiach look like?
Right, that's a sort of a very, very broad and deep question. There's a lot written on that because the Torah itself doesn't make any explicit reference to
Matan Torah.
Matan Torah being tied to Shavuot, although the very fact that there's this countdown between the Exodus and Ma'amad Har Sinai means that it's there in the text of the Torah. But the emphasis in the Torah, which is reflective of the first phase of the first Jewish Commonwealth, or the first Israelite Commonwealth, is on life in the land as it's lived. It's an agricultural holiday. So you go from the agricultural into the more abstract. So if I were going to have to bet on it, it was the culture of the sages in the Second Temple period that really brought forward. I want to be clear. They didn't create, but brought forward the element of revelation in Sinai, which is in Shavuot, because for a lived experience, that was what was relevant for people after the destruction and the dispersion, as opposed to the agricultural cycle. Right. So what would Yemot HaMashiach, what would Shavuot and Yemot HaMashiach look like? It would be a real celebration of revelation.
Well, I'll tell you something else, and like, first of all, I have no idea, right? But where my mind goes is that, first of all, it will be in Eretz Yisrael, right? That the center of where Shavuot will be in Eretz Yisrael. And on that note, Shavuot is, part of the 3 pilgrimage festivals of Pesach, Rosh Hashanah,
Sukkot and Shavuot.
Sukkot, and Shavuot, excuse me. Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, right? And that, like, on Shavuot, we're bringing the first fruits, we're bringing the wheat, right? So that's what you were talking about in terms of biblically. It's not talking about Matan Torah. What it's talking about is this pilgrimage to the temple to bring our first fruits, to bring our wheat offering. It's also on Shavuot is when a double portion of bread is offered in the Beit HaMikdash, which is also a unique thing. And so like, that's like that's like what we see in the biblical text. And then, like, as you said, the larger context that the sages bring in, that corresponds to, that holiday also corresponds to Matan Torah in terms of the timeline, right? And then the idea of, like, the days of Mashiach, in which, personally, again, this is just where my mind and imagination goes, is that in Yemei HaMashiach, it's like everybody's going to receive the Torah. And I think that that's just, like, what's so important. Like, when we talk about Matan Torah, like, and like, what's going to happen on Thursday night? Like, what's the opportunity? What's the opportunity that's available to us on Thursday night? Starting Thursday night, the 6th of Sivan, what is the spiritual
week from tonight?
Opportunity? Huh?
A week from tonight.
Yeah, a week from tonight. What's the spiritual opportunity that's available to us? Well, it's Matan Torah. It's the giving of the Torah, right? So in that sense, it means that the opportunities that we have, we can receive something, right? We engage in traditionally on Matan Toratenu, Yom Matan Toratenu, the day that God gives us the Torah. It's learning Torah. So, like, I would say that, like, the opportunity is through learning Torah to internalize a consciousness. I think that's a big piece of what's available.
It's a transformative experience, revelation, right? And that goes back to my original point, which is it's less about content than it is about the experience, because the content is always going to be subject to interpretation and reinterpretation. But if you let the words of Torah transform you, if you treat the Torah not as an answer book, but as a training manual, something which will make you into the type of person who is able to birth its deeper meaning into your own life and into the world, that's the type of revelation which is available to us even now.
Right. I finally understand what you're saying when we say content versus experience, meaning the content that I was reading was Parshat Bamidbar, but the experience that I was having was an alignment of my soul.
And the experience leaves you changed in the way in which you return to the content, and it's not the same. Obviously, it's the same words on the page. You've changed.
Mm-hmm.
The same way that Am
Mm-hmm.
Yisrael has changed in the 3,000 years that we've continued to read that. Why do we read the same parsha every week? Or, I'm sorry, every year in the cycle?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because God forbid you should be the same person next year on Parshat Bamidbar, Eitan.
Mm-hmm.
It's a way in which
Mm-hmm.
we can constantly push ourselves to grow and change. It's often missed the power of a relationship to an unchanging Torah. Or, for instance, 3 times daily prayer, where you're going to say the same words 3 times over, it's a standard of measure which can force us to never be the same, to constantly grow and change. And it becomes a touchstone for knowing whether we have done so or not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what is it like when you learn Torah?
It depends on the day. I mean, like I believe that it just as like a bit of practical advice for people out there who are learners, that it's very important in your, first of all, Torah learning is a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle. You have to embrace it as such, right? And so in order to make it successful, there's 2 things that you always need to have sort of ongoing. Number 1, skill building, whether it's mastering language, whether it's deepening your conceptual framework, whether it's broadening just your exposure, right? But together with that, there has to be the Torah that speaks to your heart, that feeds you. Because if you don't learn the Torah that feeds you, you won't have the motivation to learn the Torah that builds your skills. But if you don't learn the Torah that builds your skills, you will always be sort of an object and not a subject in your Torah learning. You'll be a passive recipient of other people's thoughts instead of doing generative Torah. So I would say that the Torah that I really love to learn is the Torah that I'm not the same when I close the book.
Mm-hmm.
That something has shifted in my breadth of consciousness, my depth of relationship, my commitment to action somewhere, right? Like the Ramban says in his famous letter, before you finish learning, take a good look at what you've learned and ask yourself, what can I take with me from what I've just done? It's always true. It's just not always easy to find.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can you turn that into a bracha?
Yeah, I can. I want to give us all a bracha that we should know that God doesn't hold back. And therefore, that which limits our ability to be the people we want to be, to see the world that we want to see, to build the relationships we want to have, is our ability to receive. So we should all stretch ourselves, open ourselves, challenge ourselves to be as broad, as deep, as integrated as we can in order to receive the full depth of what the Ribono Shel Olam is just waiting to give us.
Amen. Amen. Rav Mike, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Aleph Male warm-up. Okay, I'm going to end the broadcast. We're going to jump back into the back room, and then we'll take it from there. Thank you, everybody, for watching. May Hashem bless you with a deep, deep, meaningful Shavuot. May Hashem bless you to find your letter in the Torah and realize that you are part of God's story.
Amen.
Okay. There we go.